Hello everybody, we are talking about food security today. Now this is one of the most important issues of the modern world, but if you go into the streets in any wealthy and educated country, most people could not even tell you what it is. So given that, how are we supposed to solve the major problems of the world and end the suffering of millions of people when most people don't even understand what the problem is? Well, as far as I'm concerned, education is the most powerful tool, so with that in mind, let's go on and talk about food security. Now, as ever, definitions first. Food security is the state of having reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. Having reliable access to healthy food. Reliable access to healthy food requires agriculture. It requires transport links. It requires stable economies, and so on and so on. It is not a straightforward issue. It's largely a political issue and an environmental issue. And what we need is leaders who are educated and intelligent, and leaders who are driven to do what's morally the right thing for the many. There's a huge gap between the rich and the poor of this world. That's obvious to everyone. While one country battles diseases of excess like heart disease and stroke and type 2 diabetes and cancer, another country experiences diseases like nutrient deficiency and famine. This is the opposite of food security. This is not what food security looks like. So why do we have these massive discrepancies? Well, this is a bit of an aside. At the time of writing this PowerPoint, which was a few months ago now, here in the UK, we had an MP who suggested that we pay for a lift in public sector pay cap by reducing aid for poorest people in the world. So you've got teachers and firefighters and ambulance drivers who haven't had a pay rise in a long time. And this MP is suggesting that we pay for it by cutting the foreign aid budget. We literally take the food from the mouths of starving people. And this is happening at the same time as large multinational companies who are making billions in profit are not paying a single penny in corporation tax. So maybe this goes some way to suggesting why we have a problem with food security. So what factors affect food security? Well, increasing birth rate increases population. There's more mouths to feed, but there's not more food to do it. Changing diets. If you move from a plant-based diet to a meat and dairy-based diet, where people are going to be eating a lot of processed food, that requires the feeding of livestock. This is a much less resource efficient method than growing grains. It is more efficient to eat plants. The world would be a better place if everyone was a vegetarian. Pests and pathogens can destroy crops, and this is obviously going to lead to more people starving. That's not food security. Environmental changes, like those we've seen as a result of global warming, that is a threat to food security. The cost of agricultural inputs like that sort of thing. I'm talking about water, I'm talking about irrigation. This is going to affect people's access to food. With war, governments divert resources away from agriculture and towards the war effort. People are going to be displaced from agricultural land. That land is not going to be used anymore. There's going to be border closures. This is going to stop the movement of food between regions. It's not just that the food isn't there or it's not being grown, it's that people don't have access to it. This graph here shows that the world population is growing faster than our crop yield can. Now, there's only one result of that, and that's a reduction in food security. Less people getting food. There are millions of plant species on Earth, and we, weirdly, only use a few of them for food, and that makes our food supply very vulnerable. It's vulnerable to changes in climate, it's vulnerable to pests and pathogens, and natural disasters. In order to ensure food security, we have to look after biodiversity. An example of this is what we have to protect our pollinators, for example. So if you think about it, look at this picture here. This is a monoculture. Every single plant is genetically identical to the one next to it. There is not a great deal of biodiversity here. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with having fields and fields and fields made up of one particular organism? Well, they may share the same strengths, like a high yield or frost resistance or whatever, But they also have the same weaknesses, and that weakness may if it's a particular disease or a pest or a parasite, it could wipe the lot out. It's not good for the health of a species to have such little genetic variation. To improve food security, we turn to modern farming techniques. We look at things like intensive farming. Intensive farming can feed the people of the earth, but there are lots of problems, including this lack of diversity that I've just talked about, the runoff of fertilizer into rivers and lakes, eutrophication, the bioaccumulation of pesticides, the ethical issues of penning animals in close together under real nasty moral conditions of overcrowding. Building glass houses and hydroponic facilities is obviously expensive, but this can be a way forward if hydroponics will allow you to grow food in a place where you couldn't previously. You can if you can afford the setup costs, you can grow food in the middle of the desert. That's one of the benefits of hydroponics. Sustainable fishing. If we want to ensure sustainable fishing, we have to have quotas on how many fish can be caught in a given year. And we also need to control the net size. So if the hole in the fishing net is very small, you're going to catch everything. You're going to catch the adult fish and the juvenile fish. And then guess what's going to happen a few years down the line? There aren't going to be any left. So have quotas for how many you can catch. Control the net size so young fish are not caught and have time to mature. Use fish farms. That takes the pressures off of the wild fish stock, giving them time to recover. If we're using sustainable methods of getting our food, we are more certain of food security in future. So we have to be going down this route. We have to be going down the route of sustainably producing our food. It is in our own interests.